Good afternoon. How's everybody this afternoon? We will get started so I don't keep you too long. Welcome everyone. This is my inaugural open forum, so be gentle with me. So thank you all for joining us either in person or electronically. And my understanding of the model is I'm going to tell you a little bit of stuff, and then Jill and I are going to be, Jill, also known as Oprah, and I are going to be over here. And I'll get to be put on the hot seat by anyone who might have a question. For those of you who, well, I guess you could even be in the room if you wanted to do this, but not in the room especially, go to slido.com. Your code is pound N426, which will allow you to ask questions anonymously. And again, it's hard for me to look at myself this many times. I can only imagine how difficult it is for you. But it's been a whirlwind of seeing the place, and I want to thank everyone who's been generous with their time in hosting me and Ingrid. I think we've gone to most of these together. And I know that I've interrupted your workday. I apologize for that, and I'm very grateful that you took the time, were able to take the time to tell me more about your programs and services and the things you're proud of and the things you think we might be able to do a little better at. And I've learned a great deal so far. One of the most impressive things I've learned is almost every place I went, when I said, tell me about what you really like about UHN or working where you work, and it was almost, I would say it was to a person, I heard my team. That, you know what, I am so proud to work with the people that I work with. I have a great group of colleagues. It was just a universally important message and universally heard message. So I have to tell you that was really important. I obviously haven't been everywhere yet, so I have much more to learn. But the continuity that I heard across the sites, across the organization, across the campuses, across the programs was really, truly impressive. I also saw the importance, and I guess I should confess to you, before I came to UHN, I always would drive, like even come to some meetings here. They were often in the boardroom, so I just assumed all the space of University Health Network was as nice as the outside looked. And I didn't think I'd have to do any much work on looking at any redevelopment or pitching the ministry for some new space. And I think I've come to a conclusion that that might be part of my other duties as assigned with my senior management colleagues. So that was a little bit of a learning. I also saw some really specialized services here, services that frankly we are privileged to provide. Sometimes we're the only people who do this in Canada. So for our nation, others for our province or region, and still others for the world, actually. So I think we sometimes forget just what remarkable work is being done at UHN, and I want to very sincerely thank you for that. In my tours, I also had the opportunity to visit a number of one-offs and talk to a number of people and learn some things about programs I actually didn't know before I came here that UHN had such a large footprint in, the biggest one being mental health. That, you know what, I wasn't actually aware that UHN had such a large mental health mission and large mental health population and number of programs. And then I also got to see within our other programs the importance of extending behavioral health, mental health and addictions into some of those areas where we are very well known, like cancer and cardiac, and a number of areas where we know that behavioral health can and should play a particular role. Dr. Rubin would be quick to point out for us that if you had, for example, a myocardial infarction and a mood disorder after that, your probability of mortality goes up 400%. That's a really big, huge number. And you know what, are we sure that all of our cardiac patients are getting adequate behavioral supports? Yeah, probably not, Barry. You can correct me if I'm wrong about that. But I think we all, in a quest to provide truly comprehensive biopsychosocial care, recognize that is an increasing opportunity for us. I also visited a number of clinics, including our family practice team, which was great to see and better understand the role of family practice at UHN, which I learned much more about than I'd historically known. And one of my highlights so far in 8 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, it only feels like 2, was convocation at the Michener, and I don't know how many of you have had the privilege of taking part in that, but there is nothing more exciting, rewarding, stimulating, and energizing than meeting newly minted healthcare providers who are just starting their journey and not yet jaded like some of us, and optimistic about changing the world, and I have no doubt that it is a generation that will do that. So let me tell you some initial strengths that I think are really important to UHN. So teamwork is palpable. That people talked about it, demonstrated it. I saw it over and over and over again. The breadth and scope of our clinical and research programs, and I think one of the things that few of us have really appreciated was just how fortunate and unique we are. We're truly unique in the world almost to have our own educational institution embedded in a tertiary quaternary community hospital network. And in my view, one of our greatest opportunities is to think about what are some of the new models of care and what are some of the new professions or professional extenders that would allow us to really reinvent some of the care that we'd like to deliver, beginning with greater integration in the pre-acute, acute, and post-acute phase, which is so much key to our mission. Some opportunities, always. These are never easy. I don't know, I couldn't get on a plane today and go anywhere where I'd say this is perfect, but I heard from you and certainly continue to hear from frontline staff that more integration between care, research, and education was important. We had a little chat this morning at our executive leadership forum about just how much of our own research, the research that we undertake right here at UHN, do we actually translate as quickly as possible into our own clinical practice. And we know the literature would say it's about a 7-year cycle. I think UHN in much of that is doing much, much better than that. But where we know UHN's research is outstanding and we've seen an improvement in care and an improvement in quality of work life, can we shorten that lag between research and care and, of course, education? One of the things I did hear that was a little bit concerning to me and would be, I'm sure, concerning to you was that some of our learners have not said that we are the best environment for learning within the University of Toronto network, that we can improve that, and we can improve that by collegiality and communication and respectfulness, and I think that's a really important theme. If I were going to say, what did I hear consistently that some of our frontline staff would like, and frankly some of our leaders would like, it was really around professionalism, integrity, and respectfulness. And so we all know that we all make errors in that regard, and we can all up the bar. But I heard really loudly and clearly, we expect the senior team to deal with behaviors that are inconsistent with our mission, vision, and values. So we'd like to see more action on that one, and my colleagues will be looking at how we can do a better job of that. That doesn't mean that behavior that's less than perfect is immediately punishable by something horrible. Some people whose behavior is less than ideal have frankly never had the feedback. And so our first effort is to give people feedback if collegiality and communication isn't ideal. Second will be to help them understand with some tools how that could be improved. And third, without improvement, then obviously we have to have a more robust conversation, as they say, fireside chat, some would refer to those. You'd probably all be shocked to hear that I occasionally heard an IT system would be helpful for UHN, but only a couple of people mentioned that to me. So there was no, so let me pause on that one and just say, heard loud and clear. David and I are fully engaged, as is the board, to move forward. And again, this morning had a conversation about reconvening some processes to look at what options are available to us with speed and alacrity, but without me going to jail based on the broader public sector guidelines. I'd like to stay at UHN, but we do have to make sure that we remain true to that important value for money. I've mentioned to you physical space. The other important thing, clearly, I heard loudly and clearly the importance of access. And you know, I want to thank every one of you who are contributing to operating a remarkable hospital system like ours, sometimes at 120% capacity. And that is really a very tough thing to do, while we're also saying caring safely is our most important ingredient, and people are actually really trying to work in less than ideal conditions, far less than ideal conditions. So we know the occupancy issues. I think the bed map will help. I wish I could tell you I think that Premier Ford is going to send us a truckload of money down the way, and we'll have lots of new. I don't think the province of Ontario is in an economic position where that's likely. So clearly, we will continue to be looking at how we can do more with what we have. And in that being the case, it is just essential that we and you work so closely together to talk about, number one, are we doing things that don't add value for patients or for scholarship? And if we are, maybe we should stop doing some of those. Number two, are there better, faster, cheaper ways of doing things? Number three, are we the right people to be doing them? I would say I haven't stumbled upon a ton of areas where I'd say that wasn't the case, or that there's a bunch of other people out there saying, gee, send me some more patients, I don't have enough work. So I think we recognize that our mission will be very much as it has been. It would be unfair of me with the bed map discussion not to recognize the profound change around our sites. So when I probably first started in this field, the thought of UHN, its member organizations, would have been as quaternary tertiary hospitals. And all of a sudden, we're seeing with huge densification around each of the sites that we are indeed also secondary level hospitals. So I'm starting to think of us almost like hospitals or institutes or centers, quaternary and tertiary centers within a general hospital. And that, but we are a general hospital as well, especially for that community that geographically surrounds us. And as you look at the condos going up around each of the sites, we know that many patients are choosing, through our emergency rooms particularly, to get that unscheduled care at one of the UHN sites. So we're going to have to figure out how we address that, deal with that, and still protect our tertiary and quaternary mission. And prioritization, I did hear a lot of people say, we're really busy and you keep asking us to do more. And so, you know, if you want us to do more of one thing, do you think we might revisit the list of things you've already asked us to do, and could we do less of something else? And that constant reprioritization, I hear you, particularly as we move into renewal of our IT system. We probably do have to go back with you and ask, what are some of those things on the corner of your desk that you've already been asked to do that we might just have to say, time out, we're going to hold off on that one while we prioritize 3 or 4 main things, get them done, and then move on to the the list of the next best things to do. So the other important thing I heard when I got here, both from you and the board, was let's get to the conclusion of a strategic plan to complement all of you and the senior team and the board. You've spent a lot of time over the last 2.5, 3 years really looking at strategy, and I was fortunate to inherit a number of really interesting documents as I began better understanding how much and how deep work had been done here on where the strategic plan might go. I'm again want to thank Jill and Ingrid and the team. We're out there listening to you, talking to you. The last few days has been particularly opportune with the barbecues, but again, just great engagement in hearing from people on the strategic plan. You've seen already, or those of you who are becoming bored, I'm sure by my weekly emails, you've seen already, I'm a firm believer that everyone at UHN has an important role to play. Some of us are not more equal than others. We all have unique missions. Some of us have the full mission of comprehensive clinical care, big R research and education. All of us have a significant role in clinical care and clinical education and quality improvement. But for me, it comes back to your decided motto of the patient comes first. And if that's the case, it shouldn't matter what service it is. If you're in our emergency room or one of our beds, any consulting service that we provide to you must be excellent. So we should eradicate the view that some of the animals are more equal than others. They're all important, and we need to figure out how we make those important services optimal across the sites. For the strategic planning process, and I want to thank Fatima and Matt and the team in corporate planning, what we're really focusing on at the moment is trying to bring this to a rather quick conclusion. What are UHN's strengths? What matters to you? And we really do want every patient and every member of the team to be able to see themselves in UHN's strategic plan going forward, and what makes UHN special. The business types would say, where will we win? And that's been a discussion, I think, that's happening daily, and it's a very important discussion. So you've already begun collecting your insights. You've already done a huge amount of pre-work in the last couple of years, and our objective is before the end of the year to publish that with the board's approval and support, and then make sure by the beginning of the new fiscal year that we are in full swing of implementation of a new exciting strategic plan that reflects the work that's being done. Here's a way for you to stay connected to the planning process. Look at uhnstrategicplan.ca. There's a website, there's an email address, and I'm going to keep you up to date in my weekly columns. We also, here's some things that we heard from you and your colleagues already. Quality of work life is important. We want to recruit, hire, and retain the best in healthcare. We want to leverage opportunities for interprofessional collaboration, and I can't tell you how much that came through in my tours. Patients first just resonated with everyone, but very quickly after patients first was but quality of work life for staff. Great experience for patients is very difficult if we don't also provide a respectful environment for our people to do their work, and the necessary tools, including a strong electronic infrastructure and physical infrastructure, to be a successful clinician or those who support clinicians. Glad to say that safety and quality continued to be a theme that's come through loud and clear, and a real push for more research, which I think is one of the defining characteristics of UHN. As a matter of fact, I heard, and I really like the way this was framed, that one of the really unique things about UHN, one of the things that UHN wins at is it's a unique environment to marry clinical care and research in perhaps the most intense way any of you have seen in any hospitals, and I'd have to echo that, which is a great point of pride. And within that, the board's goal, our goal, through Brad's leadership, is how would we double research at UHN over the next 5 years? That's a broad, big task. Brad, you shouldn't feel at all pressured by that. 800 million. That would be grand, and we know actually with the funding of research these days, that means it's not optional. Excellence is required for peer-reviewed research to get funded, and it speaks volumes that this is the most research-intensive hospital in Canada, and it really does have the chance to be even more so, so we should put all of our efforts and shoulder to the wheel on that, as I know we are. So now I guess the fun part comes. You get to grill me, and go to slido.com, enter pound N426, and they will magically appear here. Oprah and I will begin immediately to my right. Thank you. So apparently I'm supposed to sit there. And you're going to be able to look at that screen when Ingrid turns it towards you. Oh, well, you're very impressive.
Well, not yet, because it doesn't work at the moment.
Oh, wow. I guess you get to choose the questions, or do
I think so. Here are the rules. You can vote on these questions. So if you see one you like, you can vote it up to the top. We have Sean and Aubrey down here. They're going to run the microphone up, but we also have at least 100, maybe 150 people watching this live, so I may have to repeat the questions because I don't think they can see them. So the first question is welcoming Kevin. Actually, two questions welcoming Kevin. The first one is about the new PC government and how we're going to work with them.
So I've been in healthcare for a long time and worked with governments of every stripe, and I don't think we're going to work with them differently than we have with other governments. I think we're going to listen very clearly to their agenda. And you've heard Premier Ford's agenda. He's created through Dr. Devlin basically ending hallway medicine as a real focus for them. I think we have to first understand what does that mean exactly. I think we all have a physical impression, but drilling down on what would the government of the day like to see. For me, it's always been helpful if you're looking for investment to really understand what the government is trying to achieve in a very granular fashion. So is that shorter wait times? Is that getting people out of emergencies more quickly? Is that shorter time to see a specialist? Is that better home care support when we discharge you early? And we've already begun reaching out to Minister Elliott's office, and as she gets up and staffing, and we'll certainly be reaching out to the Premier's office to better understand those things, Dr. Devlin and his committee as it gets going. So first and foremost, tomorrow or today, the throne speech?
Today, 2 o'clock.
So at 2 o'clock, I would encourage all of you to listen to the throne speech, and particularly listen to what the throne speech has to say about healthcare and research. And if you expect any government to invest in you, you have to listen to what they promise. And so we'll be looking very carefully at what they promise and how what UHN can offer them to fulfill their promises can be realized. And last but not least, how are you going to measure that? Governments of the day want to know, well, if I'm going to make an investment, what will I get for my return? And can you give me some metrics or measurements or outcomes? So we'll be working very closely with the programs to figure out what those might be.
Okay, so a question that seems to have gone down a little bit, but it really is about funding. So everybody knows that the funding comes through the TC Lynn, and there are probably many people in the audience who would like to see more funding for their area. So how do we work with the TC Lynn, and how do we make sure that that is aligned with the government?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, we have a great relationship with the Toronto Central Lynn. I've already had 4 or 5 meetings with Susan Fitzpatrick, the CEO of our Lynn, and a number of her staff. Second, I think there is no question the reputation, role, and significant clinical service and academic mission that we have is really well recognized by the Lynn. As far as more funding, to be very frank, I don't think we're in an environment of increased funding or across-the-board funding. I think if we're looking for any additional funding, it's probably going to be around government's particular mandate. So if ending hallway medicine is an important ingredient, I think we'll have to put the lens on that says, in every ask, would it actually contribute to seeing fewer patients in hallways and emergency rooms, and sadly in some cases in wards? And if it doesn't do that, I suspect this might be a government that says, I'm going to be really focused. Why would I spend the limited resources that I have not on my priorities? So I think we're going to have to go back to the Lynn and help them understand how we can help this government achieve its objectives. And that's a noble cause. I don't think any of us are proud to see hallway medicine occur. We don't want to treat patients in less than ideal conditions. Part of that might also be an opportunity for us to talk to government about some physical plant reinvestment. I've spent quite a bit of time in both of the emergency rooms, and I can safely say they are woefully inadequate physically to meet the needs of our population and as an environment for ideal working life for our staff. So I know we're going to have a robust discussion with government about how we could make some investment in the capital plant there.
So the next question asks about the changes you've made to the organizational structure after your arrival and how you look at organizational health, structure and capabilities going forward. I also saw a question in there about centralization versus decentralization of some of the services in the organization, which has been a change in the past little while.
Right. They're great and tough questions. So you've made changes to the organizational structure after your arrival. How do you look at organizational health? Mostly, I think I look at it by talking to people and talking to those involved, including talking to our patients. I think on the structural side, I have to confess, I've lived in so many different structures over the years. I feel it's it's nice to have on a piece of paper, but what's really important is how do things actually get done at UHN? And my motto would always be people closest to the patient know best how to do things. While it's very fair that our government and our board and our senior management team have a responsibility to focus on what and why and when and with how much, but after that, The best advice I ever get is talking to people closest to the patient and, frankly, talking to the patient and family. So I'd like to see more of that decision-making pushed down. I'll also be honest, you will be surprised to hear me say UHN has a complicated structure. And getting organizational charts on one page hasn't always been easy for my aging eyes, but I am a great believer in simplicity. So I'm certainly looking with a view to, could we simplify this and reduce the number of levels? I don't mean by that job elimination. I mean reducing the number of levels between ourselves and the patient. And the more levels you have, I think the greater probability those experts in things like Lean and Six Sigma and performance improvement would say, the more likely you are not to deliver a good service. So I think I'm really very keen on flatter organizations and getting decisions made close to those who provide the care, and unquestionably with a loud voice by those who receive the care. The last piece I'd say on this one, Jill, is I'm really, really excited by the new world of digital health and digital technologies, and compared to when there's my iPhone, compared to when I started in healthcare and working at McMaster Medical School, an iPhone is an ICU, right? We can do telemetry and many, many things. This is not tomorrow's dream. These are all existing technologies. I also know that many of the things that we do could equally be done well at home. And put up your hand if you disagree. As a patient, I don't know anybody who says, gee, I'd like to spend a longer time in the institution if I could possibly go home. I know our food is excellent, but beyond that, most of us want to go home. And I think we're really expensive places. The third is just to remind us, if you're a believer in research, which we all are at UHN, some very good studies out of the United States. I think this one was published in The Lancet that talked about the 3 highest reasons for mortality in U.S. hospitals. The first was cardiovascular disease. You'll be happy to know Dr. Rubin. The second was oncology. Is Dr. Gasparini here? If not, Marnie is. You'll be happy. And they're sitting together, the two top illnesses. But third, and very, very concerning, is hospitalization. Right? So just think about that if we're really good consumers of research. The third highest reason for dying in a hospital in the United States is hospitalization. If that's true, we want to drive down. We want the lowest lengths of stay in the continent, not for economic reasons or safety reasons, but that does mean we need to figure out how to deliver those services at home, and home care to be part of our care team and experience, not an add-on, a central part. And so I'm hoping we can champion that model.
So I'm going to ask one more question from the board, and then we're going to go to the audience. There's a question about your leadership style, which I'm going to translate a bit into how best to work with you, possibly how best to get you to do what somebody wants you to do. So talk about how you work best, the way you take in information, what you want to see when somebody's coming.
So I'm going to be really nasty to Jill, really nasty to Jill, and I'm going to do what you're never allowed to do with the media, and I'm going to turn that question around and say, you and I have now worked together for 8 weeks.
Yeah.
You answer that question.
Sure, I can answer that question, and you can tell me whether I'm right or not. I think Kevin is a person who takes a lot of information in quickly, but he doesn't take it from PowerPoint presentations. He's not particularly interested in process, although believes that there are lots of people in the organization who are responsible for process and responsible for their own jobs, and wants to know when something's really gone wrong because it's going to end up in the paper or at the board, and so no surprises. But I guess what I would say is I think you're a very verbal person. I think you're a verbal learner.
So is that
Am I right?
both? You are. I think you're right. The front row is nodding, so I have to confess. More importantly, Grace is nodding, so she knows the most of all of us on this one. So I think that's true. I think I'm going to give you a little clinical analogy. On a couple of occasions, I wouldn't say this is unique to UHN, but sometimes hospitals, big hospitals, suffer a serious case of constipation. And after a laxative, it sometimes gets a bit messy, but once things get back to normal, it's a pretty good thing. So I'd like to see us do more rapid decision making, including saying no. right? So I know that it's pretty frustrating not to get a decision, number one. And number two, I'd like the lens of scholarship. I include education and research when I say scholarship in one. The lens of, did this do anything to improve scholarship? And did this do anything to improve how we care for patients? And my third question is, did this empower a high-quality work-life experience? If anyone listening or in the room today, if the answer to none of those questions is yes, I think we should be asking ourselves the question, why are we spending our time with that at UHN? It didn't help patients. It didn't improve learning. It didn't improve knowledge. That's our mission. Let's think about whether we should spend our time with that. You're right, I'm not really big on hearing the process, although I appreciate process is important. I know you've done a lot of it by the time it gets to my colleagues in the front row. So I would say if you made me choose process over outcome, it would be a big, big, big focus on outcome.
Okay, so now I'm going to go to the audience. A burning question anywhere? Sean and Aubrey can dash up. Nope, no burning questions. Okay, so how are you? Oh.
Did we see a burning question?
We saw a hesitant hand. Okay.
It was just a wave.
Just hit your. Yeah. Okay, I am going to go to the next question. So, how are each of the site's strategic plans being integrated with the full UHN plan?
Great question. So, I would say each of this, if we're really being strategic, that the full strategic plan of the organization in a more bottom-up mindset will be considering what each of the sites are focused on, want to achieve, and what, frankly, where the opportunities are. In addition, where does the data say we should be doing a little better than we are, if we should? And then rolling that up into, so what are the overarching united themes? I know there are different cultures in each of the buildings of UHN, and I don't believe that there's any great value in trying to eradicate those, but collectively, what are the things that unite UHN no matter which building or program or service you're in? So I would say it again at a very high level. Civility and respectfulness as part of our behavior is going to be a uniting factor across our strategic plan. The true integration, best in country integration of education, research, and outstanding clinical care is something that should unite UHN. A concern for and a broad-minded approach to the health of populations that we serve. And last but certainly not least, what kind of a quality of work-life environment are people who are here experiencing? Those would be the big, broad brushstrokes for me. Beyond that, I think I want to listen very carefully. And frankly, one of the things that we can do a better job of, I think, everywhere, not just here at UHN, many academic centers are good at saying, you know, we're world-class at, and I'm going to always be skeptical of that. I think that's the right approach. I actually don't want us to tell ourselves that we're world-class. I want other world-class colleagues who have no conflict in so declaring to actually say, wow, that is an amazing place. That is among the top 5 in the world. Self-declaration doesn't seem very humble to me or valid. So you know what, when the director of the National Institutes of Health or Dana-Farber Cancer Center or you name it, your favorite place in the world, who have no conflict in saying so, I'm not co-publishing, I'm not being paid by, I'm not conflicted in any way, are saying that's the place I want to be, that's the place I want to come. You know, how many young fellows are saying, hey, I want to be a Princess Margaret to learn about this new procedure in cancer care? Those are going to be really important in my view. So self-congratulations, it's nice, it's a little bit necessary, but it's totally insufficient. And I think if we're going to hold ourselves out there for patients and say we're number 1 or among the top 5, we better be able to prove it.
So I do want to say that we are capturing all the questions and we will be answering them all. The one I'm going to turn to now, because there are a couple of them and there are a lot of votes for this one, Can you provide insights into the perception that UHN is top-heavy, very highly paid executives, while frontline staff are overworked and underpaid?
Well, I know I need to lose a little weight, so I'm going to have to validate the top-heavy possibly. The highly paid executives and frontline staff. So, you know what? That will always, there is often a perception of that. I wouldn't say it's unique to UHN. I'm looking at that data. So Darlene and I actually just yesterday discussed, show me some data on UHN's administrative spend, number one. Number two, if you look at, and you compare us in our salary compensation models, do we look like an outlier? And to my knowledge, we do not look like outliers, but if Emma, if we do, you'll tell us, or we'll get Mr. Ford, I'm sure will tell us very soon. He's a very, very fiscally focused guy. The second piece, I think, frontline staff, the underpaid piece, most of our staff are unionized. So we actually work with centrally negotiated collective agreements led by our partners from the labor community. Many of those are centrally negotiated, not all. So the underpaid piece really is, I would say, relative to who. I get the overworked part, and I think the challenge of the overworked part is we have a pie-sharing exercise when it comes to money. This is how much money comes in, and this is how much we have to spend, pretty much period the end. And then we have a bunch of agreements with our funder that says, on acuity, on volume, on outcome, on length of stay, you have to stay in those corridors or you don't get that much money. I only know two ways to save money, and neither of them are popular. One, pay less people, or two, pay people less. I don't know anybody who likes either of those options. So my view would be the best way we can advance fair compensation practices are, number one, get involved in our central negotiation processes, which I know we do. Number two, demonstrate how we might be different when we are, because I think the overworked piece really says, are our ratios and staff mix ideal? And I've yet to find anywhere in the world that they're perfect, but I know Joy and Mike and others and Charlie are putting lots of energy into looking at that. I shouldn't leave this topic with the view that I think there's going to be a whole bunch more money to add additional people to the front line. What I should say is I think we have to ask the frontline people, is the overworked perception because you're doing things that don't add value to clinical care or scholarship? And could we get out of your way to stop doing some stuff that actually doesn't matter to anybody? And if the answer to that is yes, we should get out of your way and let care teams redesign the care process.
Okay, a question that actually is being asked a lot in the general public as well is, does the public sector hiring freeze and other expense freezes affect UHN and Michener, and if so, how? So part of that is, we probably don't know yet, but as we look at the environment, what do you think?
It has not officially yet been extended outside the Ontario Public Service, but I think many people would predict that not dissimilar models are likely to emerge for folks like us. But I think that is back down to what the Premier and the Cabinet end up deciding. As you know, we haven't been in a hiring freeze per se, but we've been in a constrained environment, and particularly on the executive compensation side, in a freeze for many years. So I suspect even without one, funding won't increase dramatically, so we're probably living within pretty much the pie that we have. This may or may not be popular, but I'll be completely honest with you. What this government may end up doing, some are speculating, and this is only speculation, so please don't take it as anything more than rumor mill. Some would say this government is more likely to freeze expenses and costs, which would include labor rates. And while that will be unpopular with our collective bargaining partners, one of the challenges we start every year at UHN, for every single percentage point we don't have through inflation or what other expenses grow, you know, we talk about being $20 million underwater every year, every time we lose 1%. and we lose 1% every time inflation goes up by 1%. So that's a challenging position to be in. And I guess the good news is the Premier in campaigning have made pretty clear that he was not going to harm frontline staff. Ratios, I believe, are included in that, but we'll see. And that if the desire is to end hallway medicine, most of us would say you have to increase capacity, you have to increase supply if you want to put more people through that, unless you think we're providing really long lengths of stay, which I can safely say, looking at the data at UHN, most of the time is not the case.
So the next question is about what you've seen at UHN so far, what keeps you up at night, if anything?
That's a really great question. I wouldn't, keeps me up at night. I would say the worries at UHN aren't different than the worries that I've had as a CEO of a healthcare system in the past, but they are the same, and there are some things that certainly keep you awake or keep you wondering or you wake up early thinking about. Certainly frontline staff burnout and high quality work life are, particularly when you think about young people beginning clinical careers or in academic careers, can we continue to make these attractive places? From my tours of what I've seen, you have done a fantastic job, and UHN continues to be a place where people wish to work, thank God. The other things that obviously do keep me up a bit at night are when I hear of cases or situations where either our physical plant has allowed the delivery of outstanding, safe clinical care to be less than ideal, or where people feel as though the level of workload is so great, especially when we're operating at that over 100% capacity, that frankly our talk on caring safely is good talk, but we're not walking it. That keeps me up at night.
So I think the question about the cost of housing in downtown Toronto is related to how attractive we are as a place to come, but there must be a point at which people won't want to make that trip. If funding for hospitals is cut or curtailed, do we have a strategy to absorb the cuts? What is on the chopping block?
So I haven't found the chopping block, and I'm not looking for it yet. I want to be optimistic. I'm always looking for efficiency, because my view is if there's a dollar that can be saved of your tax dollars and mine that can be redirected inside our own organization to improve care and scholarship and quality of work life, we want to do that. If we had to absorb cuts, I think, like always, you'll remember, you may remember a few years ago, the LIN put out like a 7-step plan, when it talks about obvious efficiencies. It talks about services that could be done outside of hospitals. It talks about, are there things that we do, frankly, because of our labor rates with our highly unionized workforce, that maybe other providers could do more cheaply? The one that was quoted in the old days, Jill, was the minute you leave a hospital, from a labor perspective, your costs go down by 30%. Now, I'm not saying that's right or equitable. That's just allegedly at the time was a fact. And if that's true, then again, I think we will be continuing to push and say what could be done in less expensive places than ours. But we have to be really cautious about that. We can't leave only the very sickest people with the very complex people and then say, oh, and we're going to have a great quality of work life, or we're going to be a great educational institution, even though you can't see any patients that are more like those you're going to practice on in the settings you're most likely to end up in, which is not University Health Network, but possibly a community hospital. So we'll use the normal process. We'll get out data, of course, and say, where are we over length of stay? Where's our cost per weighted case look different? I think one of the big worries for me, and one of the important factors for UHN, it's not only the clinical piece that's going to be important to us, but if we are in a retraction environment economically, how do we not compromise our role in scholarship? How does research not suffer? And how does really good health professional training get both not only supported but further developed?
People keep voting on this, so I'm sort of, this question about respect and civility. continues to be a challenge for UHN. What reassurances can you offer to those who speak up? So I guess that gets to, some people are hesitant to speak up because they're afraid that they will suffer in the long run because of speaking up.
I was really surprised, and I have to confess worried when I heard that, and I've heard that a couple of times. So I think there are a number of models that we could employ. In some clinical departments, for example, I know that they've put ombuds people in place. Some hospitals have gone outside and said we'll have a whistleblower policy. And I'm willing to look at and consider any of those options, but I think the first issue is you would want to have assurance from me and the senior team that that will not be the case. To the degree that it's humanly possible for us to protect anybody who speaks up, and obviously the speaking up needs to be in a respectful manner, but if you are encountering colleagues who are not living up to the mission, vision, values, and behaviors expected at UHN, not only would it be my expectation that you'd share them with us, but I would want to share those with our partner, the University of Toronto, because for our medical staff and professional staff, they're not only our providers, but they're their faculty. And I don't believe either of those organizations would find that an acceptable behavior. What I know that won't completely eradicate the anxiety, but I'd invite any of you, number one, you can always email me directly, right? And I can assure confidentiality from that. Number two, I think with the university, I had an opportunity to talk with Dr. Hawker yesterday. And I think I have a meeting with Dr. Rutka coming up, so the academic chair of medicine and surgery. And we were all agreed, as I know the executive team is, that this is an incredibly important ingredient. And what I have heard on my tours is this isn't a huge number of people, it's a small number of people who need to be dealt with. And again, I want to be respectful even to those people. First question is, has anyone ever told them their behavior is lousy? The answer is yes. Has anyone then ever offered them some mechanism of improvement? The answer to that is yes, and they haven't taken them up on it. I guess you'd have one more shot. If after that you can't live up to the values, you shouldn't work here. And that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to me what role you play, whether you're a world-class investigator or our newest employee like me. If I can't behave correctly after I've been given some feedback, then I probably want to work somewhere else. And you can't be very happy here if you're behaving like that. So we're prepared to emancipate you.
Emancipation. Another.
Dr. Chan.
Dr. Chan.
So I can add something on behalf of what Kevin said. And some of you is going to see the announcement coming out because it's time for the refresh and renewal of senior medical leadership in multiple departments and programs. It will start later on this year and going on into 2019. One commitment that I can make to you, which I think Kevin and the rest of the executive team is totally aligned, and we actually start doing that over the last 18 months or 2 years when we were selecting and refreshing some of the leadership. Any issues about civility and respect of any candidate that we are aware of that has not been addressed and been dealt with, if it is service up into the search committee, I think it will be taken very seriously.
Yeah.
And I think fundamentally, this has also started at the university as well. Not only for selection of leader, but also for promotion. And so I think we are totally aligned that the days of saying that Dr. X is always an asshole. But he or she is so good that we cannot do without Dr. X as a leader. Those days will be gone at UHN. Even though I won't be around to see a lot of it, but I will be watching from the sideline and I will be celebrating.
You never know, Charlie. We might ask you to come back and help us with some of that stuff. No, so I totally agree, and I want to mention that I would think that's a really important point. I think the other issue is when we're searching, when we're actually going out and looking for new leadership roles or followership roles, doesn't matter which, I know our search processes are going to be more attentive to is there any feedback on these candidates? And I know already in some searches and in some promotion and tenure situations, people have said, you know what, their behavioral profile is unacceptable. I think particularly for those of you listening or in the audience, it goes a bit further than that though, you have a responsibility to your college. Collegiality and communication are not options. They are a core part of competence. And if you are seeing colleagues not exhibiting those, the expectation of your professional college is you should be reporting that. So you can count on our full support if that's the case. Now, we all know, especially, and I want to be very mindful, especially when you're working at 120% occupancy some days, that doesn't mean that tempers won't flare or that people aren't human. Perfection is unlikely in human beings, but when it's a regular behavior that's well known, well documented, and basically everyone talks about but nobody deals with, that's intolerable, and we just have to say it's not going to be, it won't be accepted at UHN.
So back up at the top is a question about the very complex bureaucracy. Apparently UHN is, we even know that we're very complex. So plans to streamline the administrative structure, which I really think goes back to the release of people's ability to do things where they stand.
Yeah, so we just this morning had a conversation. Marnie, Escafa, and a group that came out of senior management have also put some work into this. So in my, I'm a simple-minded person, so I'd like a simple-minded structure. With that, if I can't figure out how a decision gets made through our labyrinthine processes, I know it's going to be pretty hard for someone who's just started out as a new manager or who we're trying to attract into a management position or a frontline worker. So yes, the answer is we'd like to very much look at streamlining it. We will come out with a corporate structure. I think it'll be a simpler, flatter, hopefully quicker structure. We also want to respect that in programs and services and departments, you may choose to have some additional structure, but that'll be optional to you and how you choose to do that work. But for us, I'd like to see fewer layers between me and the patient, and again, really pushing that decision-making down of the how piece particularly, and a more rapid response in answers to questions that programs are asking. So you legitimately could say, well, what's the benchmark? We also had that discussion because we talk about benchmarking and pretty much everything else, and leave that with us. We want to go out and see if anyone's been successful in making that occur, and what is a legitimate target in an organization of this size to get some decisions made quickly. I'll deny having said this because I know it's not being recorded, but sometimes asking for forgiveness rather than permission isn't a terrible approach.
Okay, we'll go to the top question.
Jill didn't like that answer.
Well, no, it's fine. So we're going to go back to funding again, but this time on the positive side. So talk about the revenue generating opportunities, what you think might be in the future with this government as opposed to the last government. Yeah. And perhaps talk a bit about working with the foundations, because I think our foundations offer a huge opportunity for increase in revenue. Yeah.
So I think it's a great question as well. I think we do have the potential with this government who may be more willing to just slightly open the door to say, if no Ontarian waits any longer, as a matter of fact, if they wait shorter periods of time, if we're going to achieve their hallway medicine goal, and we were able to attract, because of the renown of UHN clinically and academically, international patients, without making Ontarians wait any longer, would that be possible? And I do see the potential with this government for that to be possible. I know that is rife with ethical discussion, and I'm sure there's great variation across UHN. I know there are people who are vehemently opposed to that model and others who are wildly enthusiastic. And after some discussion, I think one would have to, if it were possible, one would have to come to a decision. In that, I think whenever you're talking about revenue generation, it's better to talk about how you share the revenue before you have it than after you get it. And so I think we have to have an honest conversation about that. But you know what, I'm a firm believer in if people did the work, they probably should benefit in the revenue. That having been said, we need to be really a little more sophisticated sometimes on making sure when we say we're going to do this work and it's fully funded, that we've put all the costs in. Because oftentimes, you know what, we budget on a best case scenario, not a realistic scenario. But if there's a revenue stream to be had and clinicians who want to do it, and we're not harming an already fragile work life, then I think we should absolutely be looking at those opportunities. You also know we have a number of private sector endeavors like Altum and others, and we'll continue to push forward on those. I think the other piece is increasingly UHN has been very successful in patents and investments, and I'm hoping that some of those investments in patents and inventions will begin to bear fruit economically that we can reinvest into programs and services. It's really hard, though, I have to be really honest, when people talk about hospitals generating revenue. We have a fairly high cost structure relative to the private sector. And, you know, net, to make 1% of our budget means a pure 100% net profit, 1% of $20 million. And usually that comes with new work. So we really have to say is, number one, the revenue generating opportunity really bringing in money. Number two, are we burning out people who we already need for our important clinical and academic mission? And number three, is it sustainable? Because we don't want to set up expectations and then falter for those we've made a commitment to in a revenue generating model.
So we have a very short amount of time left. If we're going to end, I'm going to skip to a question from a patient. I don't know where this patient is, or maybe it's a member of our staff who has been a patient. As a patient, I have experienced, where the hell did it go? Excuse me.
We cut the patient off, clearly.
Ingrid, here we go. I've experienced varying processes, procedures, and levels of care across different services. What are we doing to enforce standardization of care?
So I maybe swim a little bit against the stream on this one. I don't want to enforce standardization of care. I want to encourage standards everywhere and standardization where appropriate. So if standardization actually results in improved patient outcomes, quality of work life, scholarship, great. No patient at UHN should not have the pleasure, basic confidence that we have a standard. There is a UHN standard. About 40% of the time in clinical medicine, the evidence is inconclusive. So one should still be able to say, within our clinical group, this is the practice standard. And I think increasingly we want our clinicians to come together. When evidence is conclusive, we can evaluate very clearly, are we doing it or not? When it's inconclusive, what's the practice standard our group has decided on? And if evidence becomes clearer in the future, we'll migrate towards that. We should also be contributing to it. And last but not least, I guess we always do on what's sometimes perceived as standardization, want to look at in our supply chain. Are we wasting money by not buying things in a common way, by having too many choices, by accommodating, I like to do it this way and you like to do it that way. So all that should be part of the discussion. But there are times when we've gone to standardization and it hasn't seen a benefit. But I've never seen us implement standards that hasn't seen a great benefit.
Okay, I'm going to go to the last question, which let's go to the work-life balance. You continue to mention quality of life and work-life balance as a priority. Could you elaborate on what this focus will look like for UHN employees? We'll close with that.
Yeah, it's again a great question. So I'm going to do to them what I did to you, Jill. I'm one of the newest employees in the room or on the line today. So I actually think you're better positioned than I am to make that determination. So I'd like to, with Emma, ask that question of the organization and hear from you, hear back. What would you like to see a year from now in improving quality of work life? And I want to ask you to be, forgive me for this language, but realistic in that, when we put your suggestions forward, I doubt we're going to have a huge amount of money to invest. So if you have some ideas about what we could do with the resources we have to improve our quality of work life, then we want to hear what they are. And I guarantee you that Emma and her team and the senior team will be personally taking an interest in that. And I don't know if you want to add anything to that one.
Just that our upcoming survey in September, October, will give all of us an opportunity to do what Kevin just said, and we will be asking you for one idea that you have that can help us make this a better work life for all. So we're going to be asking you for your suggestions, because you know better than we do what is better work life means to you.
And I'd like to ask, if I could, those here and those listening, to go back to your manager, director, vice president, whatever structure you're working within, chief, research director, you name it, and actually say, look, at the open forum today, we had this discussion. We'd actually like each of your groups to begin talking about, what are some of the quality of work-life improvements that people would like to see. And we can come up with some ideas in our group, which, again, we're farthest from the patient. We need you folks to tell us what would matter.
So I'm going to draw this to a conclusion, because we are reached the end of the time. And once again, tell everybody that all of the questions have been recorded, and we will come up with answers. Obviously, the session is an hour, and we can't answer all the questions. So thanks very much for coming. Thank you, Kevin. And we will